Hey, we're Saints. Father Chris here. Welcome to our Crucifixion of Life. I'm glad to have you beautiful people as we start this week. This week we're trying something new. I am going to field a question that was sent to me by a warrior saint. And so we're going to try to do that all this week. So in the comments on today's episode, throw us a question, surprise us, let us go after it. If you put questions, we'll try to answer them the rest of this week. If not, we'll figure it out. All right, here's the question. I'm going to keep names anonymous. This came from a young man, a young man that I know, and great dude. Let's call him William, right? We'll just say his name is William. And William asked me, after having read the book, The Warrior Saint, The Way of the Warrior Saint book, he said, all right, I got a question. How do you convince non-Christians who were not raised the way we were, who were not raised in the faith, how do you convince them to pick up the sacrificial life, to become crucifixional and not take the easy road and always do, the kind of the hedonistic things of the way the world leads us? It's a great question because we as Christians have a duty, right, to want to evangelize. We're not here to proselytize per se, but we do need to share the gospel and that it is powerful, that it is life-changing, right? It's the only thing that's really, truly transformative. So how do we do that? How do we convince someone, especially if they may be obstinate or they're, what's the word I want to say, like vitriolic? Maybe angry or rebelling, raging against the faith. So it's a daunting task, and it may be a task that many of us have asked ourselves, like, how do I do that? And I think there's a lot here, and we've been thinking about it, and I promised this William that I would do my best to give an answer. It took me longer than I wanted it to, but here's the answer. And I think the first thing we have to recognize is, look, it is not our job to force anyone to think a specific way, right? Like, it's interesting as a father, I've learned, like, I made my kids do certain things when they were young, right? Like things to protect them, to keep them safe, to eat their vegetables, that kind of stuff. I did my part. My wife did her part, to raise them so they would make good decisions themselves. But at some point it dawned on me, like, I can make them do whatever I want as the father, but I can't make them think a specific way. Hopefully I can teach them so they begin to think the right way, but I can't make them do that. And even more so, it's not my duty to make them think a certain way. If I'm a good father, a good, someone who teaches them well, I teach them how, not what, to think. And thanks be to God, both my girls think wonderfully. That kind of paid off, right? So, number one, it is not for us to force anybody into thinking the way we think. And you got to come to the grips too. Each one's got to make up his own mind. They've got to decide. Listen to what Paul says in Romans. This is chapter 14. He's talking about fasting, right? And the things that we eat and eating, food offered to idols and so on. But he makes an interesting statement here in verse 5. One man esteems one day as better than another, while another man esteems all days alike. Let everyone be fully convinced in his own mind. And I think, like I said, Paul's talking not about, convincing Christians, but in some sense, he is saying, look, everyone's going to have a different mind. And you may be, here's the toughie, you have to be ready and be prepared that you may be disappointed with the way another person thinks. But to each one, he has to think, she has to think in their own mind, right? And sometimes people are not going to choose what you want or what you believe or what you really know is in their best interest. But, and he goes further, and here's the key. You have to be such an example in the way you live your life that they look at you and say, oh, that's what I want, right? And then they might be more curious to go and explore. Listen, in the same chapter in Romans, St. Paul, this is chapter 14. Now we're going to jump to verse 13. Let none of us, let me try it in English. Then let us no more pass judgment on another, but rather decide never to put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother, right? And the way I'm going to take this verse is, look, it's not for you to judge how they think. They were raised a certain way. They think certain things. Who knows what all the complex reasons are why they think the way they think. But you are never to put a stumbling block. And here's what I think he means. If someone is not raised the way we were, if someone's not a Christian and doesn't accept the crucifixional life and really they're kind of going down that path of the world, and they look at you and the way you live your life and they see that somehow you are doing the same thing that they are, you've put a stumbling block in front of them. You have to live a life so powerfully, So you have to be a warrior saint. You have to live the crucifixional life so that they can look at you and say, oh, that is pretty neat. That is something I may want, right? You have to be a light. Shine a light in a dark room. Listen, now I'm going to jump to Matthew chapter 5. This is really at the outset of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, you are a city set upon a hill. You are the light of the world. Listen, chapter 5 and following. 14 and following. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hid, nor do men light a lamp and put it under a bushel. But they put it on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. Now, here's the kicker, verse 16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Right? So he's saying, Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, be such an example, such a witness that you are living ferociously as a warrior saint, that they can look at it and say, wow, this person, in this case, our friend William, he's living such an amazing life. I'm kind of curious, right? Maybe I want to explore more. Maybe I want to ask him some questions. What are you doing? How do you do this? And maybe in that moment, you have an opportunity to engage in a conversation. Again, not judging them. Some people, you just got to come to grips with it. Some people are going to choose not God, right? Some people are going to choose not to follow his will, his commandments. That's their choice, right? It's up. Everyone is free to decide and to think how they want to think. But for us, we have to be so exemplary that they look at us and it's like, oh my gosh, I totally want that. Now think about it in this terms. Think about think about your favorite athlete, right? Who was, the greatest in whatever sport, that he or she was playing in. Who are you thinking of?
Larry Bird.
Magic Johnson. Greg just said Magic Johnson, the great Laker. All right, he didn't say Magic Johnson. But think about like your favorite athlete or, successful person who's successful in their industry and whatever it may be. And you look at them and you're like, I want that, right? I want to be able to do that. You're going to see that in all of them, in all of their lives, there's one common factor, and that is crucifixional living. They may not call it that, but that's it's the common thread throughout life of success, because the crucifixional life says when you want to quit, go more. When you want to cheat, stay straight. When you want to take the easy road, get after the hard stuff and dig and grind and fight through all the hard stuff. You will see, like, no athlete wins their championship without doing that and living a life like that. No businessman or woman succeeds without grinding through. There is no overnight success. There is no one-hit wonder. Sorry, there are one-hit wonders, but there's no overnight success, right? Like, that's, I guess, is my point, is that it's something that you look at those people and you're like, dude, they put in the reps, and because of that, they were successful. Why can't you do the same with your own crucifixional life? So that when someone looks at you, they're able to say, oh, whatever he or she is doing works. I want me some of that, right? Now, let me say this too. Greg brought up a great point as we were talking through this. You may find that sometimes in witnessing to other people that about your Christian faith, about the crucifixion life, that people want to engage and they get snarky and, they're like looking for this, what'd you call it? A fight, basically, right? But the point that Greg made was this. He's like, look, you can engage if you want to, fine. It's always appropriate to witness. But at some point, you may recognize that this is just a non-productive conversation. And remember, they need you more than you need them, right? Like, in other words, I'm working so hard to live a crucifixional life. I am trying to be an awesome Father Chris who gets awesomer every single day. Every day I'm grinding to become better. I'm trying to live crucifixionally so that you look at me tomorrow and say, oh, there's some growth. And the next day, oh, there's some more. I don't have time to get lost in stupid fights, right? And so when that kind of stuff comes my way, I recognize that this person is just looking to satisfy some shortcoming within them, and I move on. Because I ain't got no time for that, right? What's her name? Sweet Brown. If you don't know who Sweet Brown is, ain't nobody got time for that, right? I don't have time for it because I'm trying to become the best that I can be. So if somebody wants to have a real conversation and is curious, even if I'm not going to convince them, great, I'm going to have that conversation. If they just want to fight to make, assuage some kind of desire inside, great. But there's other people that they can do that with, not with me. So engage, teach, but most importantly, show them by the way you live your life. And, the last thing I want to say is really in regards to scripture itself. It's an interesting thing because when we read our English Bibles, the English translations, a lot is lost, which is why we do what we do and why we have Understanding the Bible, our series that we have on our website, because it's going to help us understand really the things that we lose in those translations. But interesting is that really when it's read and heard with what it's saying, you will see that God is not stupid and his word is actually pretty cool. And in spite of what people say and the shots that they take at at scripture and at our faith, they're really unfounded. So here's the last point I'm going to add for our friend William. Look, be familiar with wisdom literature. Okay, so by that I mean the book of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job is in the wisdom text. There's a whole genre, and you can, if you need to know which they are, comment somewhere in our thread, and I'll throw the list out there. But wisdom literature is designed to, the way it was written in the Old Testament times was to say to the Gentiles, meaning the Hellenes, the Greeks who were not monotheists, who were very big on Plato and wisdom. It is to say to them, hey, true wisdom comes from God, right? So don't be afraid. I know this is heavy exegesis part, but like the idea is wisdom is wisdom. It's universal, right? We talk about American wisdom or Chinese wisdom or Buddhist wisdom, fine, but wisdom is wisdom. And it means that which is, unto the preservation of life. So for example, it's a very wise decision not to jump off a 30-story building, whether you're in China or whether you're a Buddhist or whether you live in Cleveland, right? Like that's a universal statement, wisdom. So wisdom in and of itself is to show us what is a universal truth. Now, what Scripture presents is that heeding the commandments of God, that's true wisdom. And heeding the commandments of God is living crucifixionally. So as you think through this, get down and dirty with the book of Proverbs. I mean, it's beautiful and there's wisdom. So I say that in wrapping it up because those are things that you can show the world, look, God says X, Y, or Z, and that's a truism. And it's as true today as it was yesterday, and it'll be true tomorrow, and it's true here, and it's true over there. Does that make sense? That one may need a little more fleshing out. Maybe we'll go through that later this week. But my last statement is, don't be afraid to get down and dirty with wisdom literature, because that is something that is all people can see. All right. I think that's it. Now, I need from you the last couple of things. Comment. Did I make any sense? Was I clear, unclear? If I'm unclear, you better put it in that comments. We'll get after it again tomorrow. Number 2, if you have any other questions you want us to address, put them down there. We'll get after it. We're going to give it a shot this week. It's kind of fun. And let's interact. I mean, comment with us. We try to respond to everything so we can have a conversation of sorts. Don't be shy to do that. Don't be afraid to do that. And we'll get after it. We're going to give it our best shot. All right, we love you. We'll be back tomorrow, hopefully with some of you who put down a question, and we will try to answer it. Until then, as always, keep walking on the way of the warrior saint.